What's up, guys, and welcome back to another AP United States Government and Politics exam video. Now, in today's video, I'm going to talk about the AP exam format. So, I'm going to talk about the order of the exam, what to expect the order to look like. We're going to talk about like different test taking strategies, and we're talking about how the test has changed. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the video. So you guys probably understand that the test this year is going to be different from the AP Gov exams from previous years. So this year, here's what you can expect to see on the AP exam. You're going to get there, you're going to sit down at the test, they're going to hand out the booklet, and you're going to be starting with the multiple choice section, like you did last year. So it's going to be the same. You still start with the multiple choice question, the multiple choice part of the exam. Now, last year, you were given 60 minutes to do 45 minutes to do 60 questions, and those were more vocab type questions, like, do you understand what political participation is? And do you understand what federalism is? And stuff like that. They were really easy, quick, rapid-fire questions that you would just bust through. This year's AP exam is way different. This year, the number of questions has been reduced from 60 questions to 55 questions. However, the time you're given to do it has increased from 45 minutes to 80 minutes, almost double that. So you're going from like 3/4 of an hour to an hour and 20 minutes to complete the multiple choice section of the exam. So you're given way more time. Now, these questions are more complicated and they're more in-depth. They're kind of like the APUSH questions or like the AP World questions. So if you take an APUSH or AP World or AP European History, you're kind of familiar with these questions, right? Normally those types of questions, and just like the AP Gov exam, they're going to give you a stimulus. So it might be like a paragraph you got to read, or like a political cartoon. Those are fun. Or like a map, or like a drawing of a congressional district or something like that. And then you're going to have to answer questions based on that stimulus. And it looks like College Board is also going to include a couple questions that don't involve a stimulus, but they're still very intensely driven, and so you have to spend a little bit more time on each of the questions. So you have about a minute and a half to work on each of the questions. So that's the multiple choice section of the exam. Here are some tips for taking care of that multiple choice part of the exam. Actually, before I forget, there's one big thing that's changed from last year. So last year on the AP exam, before 2019, you were given 5 answers for every question. A, B, C, D, and E. This year, you're only given A, B, C, and D. So there's 4 options to choose from. So that brings me to the first tip. If you don't know an answer, should you guess? And the answer is yes, because there's no penalty for incorrect answers. And since it's gone down from 5 to 4, you're actually more likely to pick the correct answer if you guess. So since there's no penalty for getting an incorrect answer, I would recommend that you answer every single AP question on the AP exam. You never leave an answer blank. There's no penalty for guessing. Now, when you start up the multiple choice section, I would start by taking a quick look at the entire test. That way, you'll be able to preview what you know ahead of time, and it'll make you feel better. It'll put your mind at ease, because you can look at a ton of questions and be like, yeah, I know how to do this, and not freak out when you open the test booklet and be like, yeah, I really don't know any of this, and I don't want to flip the page and see the next question. So be brief on this step, because it is a timed test, but flip through the entire exam and check out all the multiple choice questions. It'll help put your mind at ease, and it'll help prime your brain for those questions when they come back up. The next thing to do is, and you can choose this piece of advice. I would recommend that if you don't like it, you don't have to heed by it. Do whatever strategy works for you. But I think working in order would be a great way to do it. It's logical. You won't lose your place on the scan sheet as you're filling out the scan sheet. And also, you might be able to logically find the answer to a question based on previous questions you've already answered, because you're working in order. But hey, if you're more comfortable skipping around the exam, feel free to do so. Just don't remember, a lot of things that students do is they miss bubble on their answer sheet. So if you're going to skip around, make sure you don't miss bubble on the answer sheet. No matter what strategy you do, make sure that you're going to write on the exam booklet. Mark it up, make ears, write down why an answer is wrong, cross off an answer for process of elimination, interact with that test. They're not going to care what you do with that test booklet. So you might as well write it up if they cut a bunch of trees for you to use that booklet. When taking a look at individual questions on their own, make sure you read the question very, very carefully. Make sure you're answering what the question is asking, because sometimes there might be answers to different questions in your head. So make sure that you answer the question that the question is asking and not the one that you're thinking in your head. And also make sure you read all the answer choices. Don't just jump. When you say something that looks automatically correct, don't jump for it, because AP is really good at putting answer choices in there that are somewhat true but aren't always true. So make sure you slow down. You have a lot of time. You have a minute and a half per question. Slow down, read all the answer choices, and then pick an answer. In terms of pacing yourself so you finish on time and don't ever run out of time, make sure you're always aware of how much time you have left. You're allowed to bring a watch on test day, and it might be nice to have a watch sitting right in front of your desk so you can watch what time you start the test and then what time the test is going to end so that you can be aware of how much time you have in between. Always also work at a pace that's comfortable. Don't work so fast that you're missing obvious easy questions that you know you can easily answer. But make sure that you're still going at a fast enough pace that you'll finish on time, since this is a timed test. Also keep in mind that each question is of equal weight. So if one question's really easy and you can answer really fast, but then you get to a question that's going to take you a really long time, don't freak out if it's like a really complex, long question. Just bubble an answer in the meantime and guess and move on. And if you have time, sure, come back to it and see if you can find a better answer and spend some more time on it. But since each question is worth an equal amount of weight, make sure you're answering the quick and easy ones before tackling the more complex ones, since they're all worth the same points. Remember, you can still miss questions and get a 5 on the Gov exam. Finally, don't forget to use the process of elimination. If you know a certain number of answers are obviously wrong, mark them off on your list and then make sure that you use an educated guess to answer correctly the options you have left. The more you can cross off, the more likely you're going to get the right answer. Now, after you take the multiple choice section, you're going to get about a 10 to 15 minute break, and then you're going to sit back down, you're going to get the free response booklet, and you're going to write the 4 free response questions. Now, before the 2019 exam, you still had 4 free response questions that you had to answer in 100 minutes. And this year's no different. You still have 4 questions to answer in 100 minutes, but this time they're changed again to be more like the APUSH exam or the AP European or World History exam. So if you know those types of questions, then you're going to be fine. What's different about those exams compared to the AP Gov exam is that on the AP Gov exam, you know exactly what 4 questions you'll see on the exam. And they're broken down like this. The first question will always be a concept application question, where you'll need to write an answer regarding a political situation presented in a question based on a stimulus. So you'll get a stimulus, you have to read something, and then you'll have to answer the questions based on your knowledge of U.S. government and politics. The next up is what they call a quantitative analysis question. And in those types of questions, you're going to be presented with a graph or chart that's going to represent some quantitative data, something that you can count. And you'll need to answer questions that talk about trends and patterns, and then use those trends to make conclusions based on your knowledge of U.S. government and politics. The third question will always be a SCOTUS question. SCOTUS stands for the Supreme Court of the United States. What's going to happen is that they're going to give you a summary. The College Board is going to give you a summary of a case. Remember, you're supposed to know 15 Supreme Court cases. Not the Supreme Court. The College Board is going to give you a summary of a case that you should not know. So if you get to the AP test and you read the summary and you're like, yeah, I have no clue what this case is, calm down. You shouldn't know what that case is. But what's going to do is it's going to ask you to compare that case to a required Supreme Court case that you already know. That's the SCOTUS question. And then finally, you're going to get an argumentative essay in which you're going to have to argue a certain position. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the argumentative essay because I've got a video on the argumentative essay that I'll link to in the description below. So check out the link for some help on the argumentative essay. There's never been an argumentative essay on the AP Gov exam before, so definitely check out my video so you know how to write the argumentative essay. In terms of the timing for these questions, last year they recommended that you work on each question evenly, so work on each question for 25 minutes. This year the College Board recommends that you spend 20 minutes on the concept application question, the quantitative analysis question, and the SCOTUS question, and then you should spend the remaining 40 minutes on the argumentative essay. Now, if you've taken APUSH or AP European history before, you're used to the format, so you might be able to answer those questions at a quicker rate, like, say, maybe 15 minutes per question. If you're able to do it at 15 minutes per question, that'll leave you more time for the argumentative essay. Now, again, I'm not going to talk about tips for the argumentative essay since I have a video on how to write the argumentative essay, but in terms of the other 3 free response questions, I have a couple tips for you guys. Now, for some tips on the first 3 free response questions, I want to go over some general vocabulary that College Board likes to use, particularly the terms identify, describe, and explain. Describe simply means you gotta describe it. You simply have to name the answer and give a definition or explain what the answer is. You don't have to ever use technically evidence to do this on a describe. All you gotta do is name the right answer and define it. Say what it is, or what it does, what that political process does, or something like that. Just as long as you can define it like a dictionary definition and describe it and name it correctly, you'll get a point if the question asks you to define. If the question asks you to identify, that word usually comes up when you're looking at data. So if it says, like, identify the certain region that spent this much money on education, all you would have to do is look at the chart, look at the table, and literally state the number that works for that. You don't have to go into details with, like, your knowledge of the United States government. You just literally state the data in the table, and you'll get the point. Then finally comes the hardest one. The hardest one is explain. And when you explain, you have to do what you do and describe, where you name it and then define it, and then you also have to use a piece of historical evidence. You use evidence based on your knowledge of the United States government to formulate your answer. So know the definitions of describe, identify, and explain. Explain requires the most work. Describe and identify only asks you to name the answer, and then define also asks you to then the describe also asks you to define it. Keep in mind those three definitions when working out free response questions. Next up, here's a list of do's and don'ts that you should and shouldn't do when you go about the free response section of the exam. So first off, let's talk about the things that you should not do on the exam. Definitely don't use words that you are uncomfortable with or you're not necessarily familiar with. The readers are not impressed if you use big fancy words, because again, this is not an English. This isn't an English test. This is a history test. The only thing that they care about is if you understand your history. So don't try and use big words on purpose. Don't try to necessarily fake out the reader. They're government professors and teachers, and they obviously know what they're doing on the test. They're going to spot it if you're just kind of like writing gobbledygook and you're trying to outsmart the reader. Don't do anything reader outrageous, like try to preach or use cute comments. You want the readers to think positive about you, and the more academic you sound, the more positive you look in the eyes of the readers. And if the question asks you to explain, don't simply just write a bunch of information and don't ever connect it back to what the question is asking. If it asks you to explain, always connect it back to what the question is asking of you. Now here are some things that you should do on the exam. Definitely write as legibly as you possibly can. The College Board is going to force you to write in pen for the free response section. So make sure that you bring a blue or black ink pen and that you write legibly and clearly, because the easier it is to read, the better the score you're actually going to be, because the readers are just going to be more happy with you, and if you're on the cusp, you'll more likely get the positive end than the negative end. Definitely use correct grammar. While you're not graded on it on the AP exam, again, it puts you in a positive light with the reader, and it makes your response easier to grade. Make sure you answer all parts of the question, and make sure you get consistency points. Make sure you're consistent with your logic. So what do I mean by consistency points? Well, let's say that you don't know the answer to part A, and you're pretty sure you're going to get part A wrong. So you write out part A, you think it's absolutely wrong. Then we go on to part B, and it says, based on your answer in part A, don't do something completely different. Stick with your logic in part A, even though it's wrong. If you answer part B correctly, even though based on an incorrect answer from part A, you might, and I really stress the word might, but you might get full credit in part B, even though you're using an incorrect answer from part A. Because what they care about is that you at least you clearly understand the concepts, because you used the incorrect information to logically come to the right answer using your knowledge of government and politics. So always logically go with your answer, even if you're not sure that part A is right. Definitely keep your answers within the time frame. Don't go outside the time frame. So if you're looking at like Jefferson's presidency, don't talk about Andrew Jackson. Definitely stop when you're done and you've answered the question. If you keep going, even after you answer the question, the readers are only going to look at the part that's actually correct. Unless you contradict yourself later on. If you keep rambling and then you contradict yourself, even though you have the right answer, you might lose the point because you contradict yourself. So watch out for contradicting and stop when you complete the answer. Now, the free response section can be very scary because people are like experiencing test anxiety because it's such a big idea. I mean, what's free in a free response? Or it'll cause other students to be super overconfident because they're like, I could take this question in so many directions. How could I possibly get this wrong? Because there's so many ways I gotta answer the question. Either way, the greatest pitfall of students who do the free response question is their failure to plan. Make sure you're planning your strategy for how you're going to tackle each question before you start writing the question. If you don't plan and you just kind of ramble and be vague, you might contradict yourself later. So always go into each question with a game plan. Also keep in mind that each question is worth equal weight. So if there's a question that's easier than the other questions, make sure you do those other questions first before you tackle, say, like for example, say that the SCOTUS question in your mind is easier than the argumentative essay. Definitely do the SCOTUS question before the argumentative essay because they're all going to be worth the same value. And without further ado, that is everything I've got for your test-taking tips and strategies and the outline for the AP US Government and Politics Redesigned 2019 exams. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this video helps you, definitely support this channel by leaving a like and subscribe if you want to see more AP content review videos. I've got AP Calculus on this channel as well. It's my main focus. So if you're in AP Calculus, you're going to be in AP Calculus, definitely subscribe so you can keep... so you can come back and watch my other videos for AP Calculus and stuff like that, and maybe AP Physics. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video. Peace!